Meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 8 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Transport, Infrastructure and Communities. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of September 23rd, 2020. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. So you are aware, the webcast will always show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. To ensure an orderly meeting, I would like to outline a few rules to follow. Members and witnesses may speak in the official language of their choice. Interpretation services are available for this meeting. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either Floor, English, or French. For members participating in person, proceed as you usually would when the whole committee is meeting in person in a committee room. Keep in mind the directives from the Board of Internal Economy regarding masking and health protocols. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. If you are on video conference, please click on the microphone icon to unmute yourself. Those in the room, your microphone will be controlled as normal by the proceedings and the verification officer. A reminder that all comments by members and witnesses should be addressed to the chair. When you are not speaking, your mic should be on mute. With regard to a speaking list, the committee clerk and I will do the best we can to maintain the order of speaking for all members, whether they be participating virtually or in person. So members, pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee is meeting today to begin its study on the impact of COVID-19 on the aviation sector. Now I would like to welcome our witnesses. We have between 3:30 and 4:30 from the Canada Transportation Agency, the CTA, Scott Striner, the Chair and Chief Executive Officer, Valerie Legacy, Senior General Counsel and Secretary, and Marcia Jones, Chief Strategy Officer. From Department of Transport, we have Lawrence Hanson, the Assistant Deputy Minister for Policy, Aaron McCrory, Assistant Deputy Minister, Safety and Security, Nicholas Robinson, Director General, Civil Aviation, Colin Stacey, Director General, Air Policy, Christian D., Director General, Transportation and Economic Analysis, and Chief Economist. To all you folks, welcome. So with that, I'm going to move over to our witnesses. I'm not sure who's been queued to start us off with their 5-minute presentation. I'll leave that up to you folks, but the floor is yours.
Chair, this is Lawrence Hanson. I can start if that works.
Mr. Hanson, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair, and honorable members for the invitation to speak to you about the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the air transport sector in Canada. My name is Lawrence Hanson. I'm the ADM of Policy at Transport. Owing to the fact that Canada is a very large country with a widely dispersed population, and as a material number of people for whom the air mode is the only viable source of supply for parts of the year, in Canada we rely on air travel more than many other countries. Canada has built a strong and effective air transport system that connects Canadians to one another and the world, and supports tourism, regional economic development, and an aerospace supply chain that produces aircraft with world-leading environmental performance. The air sector employs about 108,000 people in Canada. Although the pandemic has had an impact on every sector of the economy, the decline in the air sector has been the most severe, and its recovery is expected to take relatively longer. 8 months into the pandemic, passenger levels are still down almost 90% from the same period last year. Canada's air system has been traditionally funded by passengers themselves. Currently, however, we have a user-pay system that has almost no users. Consequently, airlines and airports continue to face significant fixed costs with little or no offsetting revenue. Inevitably, this has led to efforts by key players to either find new revenue or more likely cut costs. There have been widespread layoffs, route suspensions and cancellations by airlines, and airports and the non-profit corporation that provides air navigation services, Nav Canada, have raised rates and fees. Over and above these negative outcomes, Canadians across the country have received vouchers in lieu of refunds for travel canceled due to the pandemic, and they are understandably angry. To mitigate the severe impact and instability caused by the pandemic across all sectors, the government has implemented broad-based measures like the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy. These have been helpful in providing initial stability for air operators. In addition, in March, the government waived payments for airport authorities that lease airports from the federal government for the remainder of 2020. The government also took action to ensure service to remote communities that rely on air transport for essential goods and services, with funding of up to $174 million announced in August and a separate program of $17.3 million announced in April for the territories alone. However, the impacts on the air sector during COVID-19 are without precedent. Service providers are unable to respond to these ongoing challenges on their own. This threatens the ability of Canadians to access reasonable air transport services at a reasonable cost. And these impacts could have important implications for communities, regions, and the wider economy. It also threatens the many jobs in the airport and in the air transport and industries that rely upon it. That is why on November 8th, Minister Garneau announced that in order to protect the interests of Canadians, the government is developing an assistance package for Canadians' airlines, airports, and the aerospace sector. Yesterday's fall economic statement provided additional information regarding rent and infrastructure support that will be provided to airports. The minister's statement made it clear that support to air carriers would be dependent on securing real outcomes for Canadians, including the provision of refunds in place of vouchers, maintaining regional connectivity, and retaining good customers of the Canadian aerospace industry.
1 minute, Mr. Hansen.
Thank you, Chair. Helping to ensure the economic viability of the sector and protecting the interests of Canadians is a necessary but not a sufficient condition for the successful restart of the industry. It will also be important to ensure that air travel remains safe and secure and addresses the added public health dimensions created by the pandemic. For that and related issues, I'll turn to my colleague, the Associate Assistant Deputy Minister of Safety and Security at Transport, Aaron McCrory.
Mr. McCrory, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Aaron McCrory, the Associate Assistant Deputy Minister for Safety and Security at Transport Canada. Since the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, and guided by the latest public health advice, Transport Canada has worked hard to respond quickly to ensure Canadians remain safe while supporting the ongoing flow of critical goods and services across the country. To reduce the risk of transmission of COVID throughout the aviation sector, Transport Canada has worked with partner departments, public health authorities, provinces and territories, and the transportation industry to implement a system of layered measures, guidance, and requirements to ensure that transportation operations are safe for workers and passengers. These include health screening measures and temperature checks to prevent symptomatic passengers from boarding flights to, from, and within Canada. Workers at the 15 busiest airports in Canada are also subject to temperature checks before entering the restricted areas. In addition, passengers on all flights departing or arriving at Canadian airports must have an appropriate mask or face covering when going through security checkpoints, when boarding and deplaning, and on board the aircraft. These requirements also apply to some aircrew members and airport workers. The department has also issued a notice restricting most overseas flights to landing at 4 airports in Canada: Montreal Trudeau, Toronto Pearson, Calgary, and Vancouver. This was done to support the work of health authorities and border authorities to conduct medical assessments of symptomatic passengers and to notify passengers of the need to self-isolate for a period of 14 days. Transport Canada acted quickly to protect Canadians and air travel passengers to reduce the risk of transmission on an aircraft and the risk of importation. Making sure air travel is safe is a key factor in supporting the recovery of the air sector. On August 14th, Transport Canada released Canada's flight plan for navigating COVID-19. This document is a foundation for aligning Canada's current and future efforts to address the safety impacts of COVID-19 on the aviation sector and was developed in close collaboration with industry partners. It demonstrates to Canadians the extensive and multi-layered system of measures that have been implemented to support public health, including temperature checks, health checks, and face coverings, as well as measures implemented by industry such as increased cleaning and disinfecting protocols, enhanced air conditioning and filtration systems, and new protocols to encourage physical distancing. Canada's flight plan is based on the comprehensive standards and recommendations from the International Civil Aviation Organization's Council Aviation Recovery Task Force, or CART. in order to ensure Canada is aligned with the gold standard of international best practices. This document will be refined as we continue to learn more about COVID-19 and as guidance and public health measures evolve at the local, provincial, national, and international levels. Preventing the spread of the pandemic has been and remains the top priority of the government. The various regulatory requirements that were put in place will likely remain for the foreseeable future. However, there is room for adjustment to support the restart of the air sector. Transport Canada will actively assess orders that have been issued to see what can be done and will be consulting with industry on possible amendments as we move forward. The department is also working closely with other federal departments to explore risk-based opportunities that will allow Canada to ease travel restrictions and reopen our borders. This includes implementing a sustainable approach to reducing public health risks today and building resilience to safeguard the system against similar risks in the future. For example, by leveraging opportunities for safe, contactless processing of passengers. These approaches will also help to rebuild public confidence in the safety of air travel. Health Canada and the Public Health Agency of Canada, working with other key federal departments such as Global Affairs Canada, Transport Canada, and the Canada Border Services Agency, are responsible for making decisions related to the lifting of travel and quarantine restrictions. Presently, testing pilot projects are underway or in development across Canada to establish a good base of evidence for possible reduction of quarantine requirements. For example, Air Canada and the Greater Toronto Airport Authority, in partnership with McMaster University, launched a testing project in September focused on testing passengers arriving in Canada. The Public Health Agency of Canada, in partnership with the province of Alberta, launched a testing project in November for passengers and workers arriving by land at the Coutts border, crossing, and by air at the Calgary International Airport.
1 minute, Mr. McCrory.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's clear that ensuring a healthy and safe transportation sector is essential for reopening borders, restarting the tourism industry, and for the safety and security of Canadians at large. Transportation will play a vital role in supporting the country's economic recovery. Continued collaboration and shared insights are crucial in overcoming the challenge that this pandemic has brought to the air sector. That is why the department will continue its important engagement with stakeholders and other partners as we work to address challenges faced by the air sector in Canada today and to ensure we have a strong industry into the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. McCrory, and thank you, Mr. Hansen. Do we have other speakers from the witness list? Is there anybody speaking from the CTA? Mr. Striner, your floor is yours. 5 minutes. We can't hear you, Mr. Striner. Still can't hear you. Is your headset plugged in? I don't see you on mute. And do you have, if you go to the bottom left of your screen, do you have your microphone set up? Try, Mr. Striner, try unplugging it, plugging it in. Try it now.
Okay, I think it's
You're
working.
Good.
Yeah, I think it's going through the laptop now. Can you, now it's switched back. Can you hear me okay now?
You're fine.
Okay.
You're good to go.
All right, this is our lives now, eh? Overcoming these technical issues. I will start again. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Je tiens à remercier. Thank you. Je tiens à remercier.
I wish to thank the committee for inviting my colleague and me to appear today. We are living through an unusual and difficult time. I hope all of you and your loved ones have remained healthy and safe over the last 9 months. While we have our respective roles to play, we are, first and foremost, fellow citizens. I have the privilege to lead the Canadian Transportation Agency. The CTA was established in 1904 and is Canada's longest-standing independent quasi-judicial tribunal and regulator.
Since the dawn of commercial aviation, have airlines and their customers gone through the sorts of events we've witnessed since mid-March. Canadian Airlines carried 85% fewer passengers between March and September 2020 than during the same period in 2019. Such a collapse in volumes is without precedent. Through this turmoil, the Canadian Transportation Agency has worked to protect air passengers. Despite the fact that almost every CTA employee has worked from home since the pandemic struck, the 300 dedicated public servants who make up the organization have spared no effort to continue providing services to Canadians. Immediately after the crisis began, we updated our website with key information for travelers so that those scrambling to get home would know their rights. We temporarily paused adjudications involving airlines to give them the ability to focus on repatriating the Canadians stranded abroad. We took steps to ensure that no Canadian who bought a non-refundable ticket would be left out of pocket for the value of their canceled flights, and we worked around the clock to process and issue the air licenses and permits required for emergency repatriation flights and cargo flights to bring urgently needed PPEs to Canada. In the subsequent months, we've invested substantial resources and long hours to deal with the unprecedented tsunami of complaints filed since 2019. Between the full coming into force on December the 15th, 2019 of the Air Passenger Protection Regulations, the APPR, and the start of the pandemic 3 months later, the CTA received around 11,000 complaints, a record. Since then, we've received another 11,000. Pour mettre ces chiffres en perspective,
to put these numbers in perspective, in 2015, just 800 complaints were submitted. In other words, we're getting more complaints every 2 to 4 weeks than we used to get in a year. We have already processed 6,000 complaints since the pandemic reached Canada. By early 2021, we'll start processing complaints filed during the pandemic, including those related to the contentious issues of refunds. If the recently announced negotiations between the government and airlines result in the payment of refunds to some passengers, a portion of those complaints may be quickly resolved.
Understand that the reason the APPR don't include a general obligation for airlines to pay refunds when flights are canceled for reasons outside their control is because the legislation only allows the regulations to require that airlines ensure passengers can complete their itineraries. As a result, the APPR's refund obligation applies exclusively to flight cancellations within airlines' control. No one realized at the time how important this gap was. No one foresaw mass worldwide flight cancellations that would leave passengers seeking refunds frustrated, airlines facing major liquidity issues, and tens of thousands of airline employees without jobs. Because the statutory framework does not include a general obligation around refunds for flight cancellations beyond airlines' control, any passenger entitlements in this regard depend on the wording of each airline's applicable tariff. Every refund complaint will be examined on its merits, taking the relevant tariff language into account. The
Mr. Striner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The APPR are among the strongest air passenger protection rules in the world. They cover a wider range of passenger concerns than any other regime. But we now know that the gap highlighted by the pandemic is significant. If and when the CTA is given the authority to fix that gap, we'll act quickly. Just before wrapping up, Mr. Chair, I'd like to mention one more area where the CTA has been active: accessibility. Since the groundbreaking accessible transportation regulations came into effect last June, we've been providing guidance to Canadians with disabilities and industry to ensure that these new rules are well understood and respected. And we've continued to play a leading role in encouraging the aviation sector in Canada and around the world to integrate accessibility into the rebuilding process. Persons with disabilities should not be left behind as air travel gradually recovers. Let me conclude, Mr. Chair, by noting that because of the CTA's independent status and the quasi-judicial nature of our adjudications, it would not be appropriate for me to comment on government policy or on any matters that are currently before the CTA. But within those limits, my colleagues and I would be happy to respond to any questions the committee may have. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Striner. And to all witnesses, thank you. Are there any more witnesses that would like to speak? I see none. We're now going to go to our first round of members. We have for 6 minutes, starting off with the Conservative Party, Ms. Cusi, followed by the Liberal Party, Mr. Rogers, the Bloc Québécois with Mr. Barcelou-Duval, and the New Democratic Party with Mr. Taylor Backrack. Ms. Cusi, 6 minutes, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to have these witnesses before us today. Thank you very much. for being here. I'm going to start going back to Mr. McCrory's comments regarding the rapid testing, as he mentioned, the current pilot project, which is going on in my hometown of Calgary, or my home province of Alberta, in YYC and in Alberta here. We are very proud of. And of course, what it allows individuals to do is to take a COVID test upon arrival. And if they receive a negative test, reduce their quarantine going forward. So I'm wondering if I could get some information as to how long it took Transport Canada, as well as other various governmental departments, to get this pilot project underway.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. When it comes to the pilot testing projects or testing projects, we've been playing a supporting role. So I hate to defer the question, but I think to get a sense of the timelines and the level of effort to get it launched, you'd probably be better off asking our colleagues from the Public Health Agency of Canada and Health Canada, who are joining, I believe, after this session. They were the leads in terms of putting the pilot in place. I can say that Transport had played a supporting role over the last several months, in particular working as a liaison between PHAC and Health Canada and the Airport Authority and the airlines involved, helped facilitate those relationships. But the actual implementation of the test and the design of it fell to our colleagues in the health portfolio.
Ms.
Okay,
Cusi?
thank you very much, Mr. Chair. But you can confirm that you are in the process of implementing this at other airports across the country.
Mr. McCrory?
Again, when it comes to the implementation of the pilots themselves, typically it's going to be Health Canada and PHAC that are the leads, but there are other pilot projects that are being contemplated. Vancouver Airport is contemplating a pilot project, for example. I believe Montreal is. So there are a series of pilot projects that are being contemplated, and we're doing our best to support them.
Okay. I'm going to go then to the announcement yesterday in the fall economic statement, where it said to further assist airports to manage the financial implications of reduced air travel, the government proposes to provide $65 million in additional financial support to airport authorities in 2021-2022. Would you, Mr. McCrory or Mr. Hansen, be able to provide any further information as to how these funds will be distributed, when they'll be distributed, and again, you mentioned briefly, I believe, in the opening, the conditions tied to the money?
Thank you very much, Chair. With regard to the FES announcement yesterday, I'm not really in a position to give any additional details beyond what the Minister of Finance laid out yesterday. And I would note that the conditional point really related more to potential agreement and support for airlines, as opposed to yesterday's funding, which was more exclusively directed toward airports.
Okay, no, I appreciate that. Of course, I'm sure you saw across the media there was widespread disappointment from the airline sectors. Certainly felt significantly short of the October 1st ask, of $7 billion. I was wondering if the government had conducted a comparative analysis of how Canada has supported the sector, or could support the sector, comparative to other nations, and if so, what it concluded, other supports for the airline sector that we've seen in other nations, comparative to what was offered to the Canadian airline sector yesterday.
Thank you, Chair. So we have looked for certain at what other countries have done. The comparisons are of course different, because there are sometimes it's support to individuals versus support to carriers. Some countries have taken equity positions in carriers. So we have done those comparisons. It's not always easy to get to apples and apples. I would say that when it comes to a final comparison with what's done in the airline sector, it will obviously be ultimately dependent on what the eventual terms of an agreement with air carriers looks like.
Ms. Cusi?
Would you be able to table your research and the conclusion up to this point of what has been evaluated versus what was offered yesterday versus what will be offered in the future?
Mr. Hansen?
Chair, we'd be happy to provide information of what we have learned about other countries' supports. It's, to be candid, quite largely publicly available information that we have compiled, so we're happy to provide that. Obviously, can't speculate on how what future support might look like here in Canada.
Ms. Cusi?
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Strainer, APPR gives airlines 30 days to respond to customer complaints. Why is it your own agency can't meet that standard? You said today you have a backlog. Why do you think any Canadian would, or anyone for that matter, would complain to your agency and wait once when they can complain to a carrier and get an answer in 30 days?
Mr. Chair, I want to thank the member for her question. I would begin probably by saying that I think it's actually that folks that are seeking compensation should, and in fact, under the APPR, must turn to the airline in order to make their claim. So if we're talking about compensation for the inconvenience associated with flight delays or cancellations, the regulations actually state that a claim should be made with the airline. But if they can't resolve that claim with the airline, then they can come and file a complaint with the CTA, and we deal with all of those complaints, as I've said, on their merit. As far as the backlog goes, obviously the CTA wants to get through complaints as quickly as it can. As I noted in my opening comments, we received an unprecedented, extraordinary number of complaints after the APPR came into force, 11,000 complaints and another 11,000 since the pandemic began. It's unheard of for a quasi-judicial tribunal to receive 22,000 complaints when just 5 years earlier it was receiving 800. We are absolutely mobilizing to get through those complaints as quickly as possible. We've already cleared 6,000 of them since the pandemic began, and we will continue to do everything we can to provide timely service to Canadians.
Thank you, Mr. Striner, and thank you, Ms. Cusi. We're now going to
Thank
move on.
you, Mr. Chair. Merci au témoin.
Thank you. We're now going to move on for 6 minutes to Mr. Rogers of the Liberal Party. Mr. Rogers, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to welcome all the guests today. A few of the questions, I guess, may fall underneath transport or underneath the health sector, but I'll leave it to our guests to decide if they want to jump in and respond to some of the questions. But for the last number of weeks and months, all of us as MPs, we've been meeting with airline officials and airport security people, airport CEOs, regional airlines, large airlines, and many of them have been advocating for support for the industry. Interestingly enough, rapid testing was a big part of the lobby that certainly that I received from many people. There were other supports such as rent relief and fees that are charged across the country to airports and and airlines. And so many of these proposed solutions were broad ranging, and Ms. Cusi referred to some of the numbers in the area of $7 billion. But also, of course, the industry was suggesting that maybe some of that might be in the form of loan guarantees, non-repayable grants, and a whole slew of possible solutions. But I want to focus a little on the rapid testing, particularly, because interestingly enough, many of the people that I talked to really focused on that and said things like that was more important than some of the money that they were requesting as well. So, can you tell me how many rapid tests have been deployed by the federal government to the provinces so far, and if whether or not this is still being deployed across the country?
Mr. Chair, perhaps I could take that question on behalf of. Thank you, Mr. Chair. In terms of the number of tests that have been deployed, we'd have to defer to our colleagues at Health Canada and the Public Health Agency of Canada. I could note that, from a Transport Canada perspective, we saw the restrictions at the border, obviously at the outset of the pandemic, had been very effective in terms of limiting the importation of COVID-19. And we are, as I've noted, working with our partners to look at what measures could be put in place to reduce or change some of those border restrictions, in particular testing. And so the pilot projects are a great example of gathering evidence to support perhaps a national program of testing as an alternative to quarantine. But it'll be ultimately our colleagues on the health sector who are going to make decisions about which tests are used, when to apply them, how to apply them. But again, I think we play a really important role from a facilitation point of view. We've done some work working with airports to look at, if you are going to implement a testing regime, what would it look like logistically? How would you set it up in your airport, for example? So we've develop what's called an operational plan to support that if and when a decision for testing has been made. We've worked with the International Civil Aviation Organization and other international partners to look at, again, what are some of the international standards or best practices for a testing regime if we go down that path. And again, as I've suggested, we've been working with domestic partners like the Calgary Airport, like the Vancouver Airport and the airlines to help them set up the testing pilots that are being led by our health colleagues.
Mr. Rogers?
So if I could ask you a follow-up question, then, can rapid testing at airports and other types of border crossings affect traffic? Is rapid testing one of the options to consider for boosting the tourism industry and attracting international travelers? And finally, what are the COVID-19 screening best practices at airports around the world that you might be familiar with?
Mr. McCrory? You're on mute, Mr. McCrory.
Sorry about that, Mr. Chair.
No problem.
I was hoping I'd go through my career without being told I was on mute, but apparently, sorry. Sorry about that. Yeah, like again, the idea of the pilots is exactly to determine what is the most effective types of tests to be using, where to apply them. There are concerns, obviously, if you're looking at the land border around what that might mean from a congestion point of view. There's even consideration being given to testing prior to departure so that we can reduce congestion at the airport again. And I talked a little bit about trying to build a touchless journey. What we're really trying to do is to make sure that we can maintain physical distance in an airport environment, reduce that congestion. So the pilots are giving us good information about what tests to use and where to apply them. And we're really proud to be working with our health colleagues on that. But in terms of which specific test to use and under what circumstances, I'd have to defer to my health colleagues for that.
Mr. Rogers?
Okay, and one final question for you would be, based on your experience and based on the travel industry and what you know about rapid testing, do you think it's one of the key solutions to getting people back in the aircraft and flying again so that we can have people moving across the country for the benefit of the tourism industry?
Mr. McCrory?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I think we tried to look at from an aviation safety and security point of view, or even a transportation safety and security point of view, we look at layers of measures. And so building layers of measures that protect, but also as we make adjustments, putting in place different layers of measures. And so testing of some kind or another, I think, is showing a lot of promise as an alternative to quarantine. We're not there yet. But the pilot projects are helping us build that evidence base that will allow us to make that decision down the road. And so it is going to be key, I think, to the kind of the successful relaunch of the aviation industry. It's some changing of the measures.
Thank you, Mr. McCrory, and thank you, Mr. Rogers.
Thank you.
We're now going to move on for 6 minutes to the Bloc Québécois. Mr. Barcelot-Duval, the floor is yours.
La parole est à vous. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And my first question will be to Mr. Strainer. Mr. Strainer, I would like to know if you're familiar with the regulation on air transportation and if your association is well aware of this as well. Yes, that's an excellent question. And the answer is short. Yes. Yes, the CTA is aware. Yes and yes. Thank you, Mr. Strainer, for your answer. So I'd like to know if you know paragraph 122C12. It deals with the right to obtain a refund when transportation services are not provided for a reason. In your opening statement, you mentioned that it's not written in the Act that companies have to refund people, but in 122C12, this is what I see here. It talks about a refund of purchased but not used services following a decision made by the client, or the inability to travel, or the inability of the air carrier to provide the service for some reason. Thank you. Yes, that article requires that the transporter. It doesn't require exactly what you are saying. It doesn't exist in the regulation an obligation a minimal obligation to refund clients. Well, thank you, Mr. Strainer. But when I read this very carefully, when I read C and 122C, it says that these are the minimum conditions that have to be met. So that has to do with all the tariffs and all the tickets. So this applies for everyone, doesn't it? This regulation applies, but this regulation also says that the airline has to specify the terms of service, and it doesn't say exactly what are the terms of service that has to be set out in the tariff. It's not laid out. Well, Mr. Strainer, 122C says that it has to contain at least the element saying that there has to be a refund if the service is not provided. So I think it's pretty clear that a refund is in order. It's clear that it has to explain to the travelers what are the conditions. And the interpretation of this regulation is very clear. I don't want to repeat once again, but it does not specify exactly anything around the tariffs. Oh, I think we're playing with words here. Are you able to talk about any type of case law that says that passengers are not entitled to a refund in these circumstances? Answer. As a quasi-judicial tribunal, we make decisions in individual cases depending on the facts and case law and regulations that are relevant to the case. That means that we consider all the conditions and all the circumstances involved. So it's a question of legal interpretation, and I think that everyone understands, and I'm not trying to, as chair, I'm not trying to interpret the act or trying to make any type of informal decisions here. There is a process, there is a legal process for this type of thing.
And I would like to know whether the CAT, the CTA rather, know the Civil Code of Quebec in terms of transportation. Well, I suppose that some know about it, know the provincial law, because we're responsible for the application of federal law. But according to the Civil Code of Quebec, if a service hasn't been given, it needs to be reimbursed. It would be interesting to know or to see that the federal could apply the laws that already exist. I have a question for you. The Canadian Transportation Agency put an information regarding credits. You said that this message is not enforceable. I would like to know whether the CTA can do a non-enforceable message against the law. Well, we have the power or the ability to publish any kind of messages that is in our jurisdiction. And as you said, the message did not change anything in terms of air carriers' obligations. There were only suggestions, but it's not an official decision. But do you have, as the CTA has the power to change the law? Absolutely not. We have to enforce the law, to abide by the law in a very impartial way. Don't you think that the position that the CTA took are against impartiality? Well, it's the impression that a lot of people have. The CTA at this point is late by 2 years in the complaints. And the last years, they said that all complaints, you would not treat any before September. But what kind of messages do you send? Because to air carriers, that means that they are not going to have to reimburse these tickets. Well, we are treating everything, but I should say that 99% of the complaints have been received since the 15th of December. It's not 2 years. But yes, it takes a lot of time, and it's better to do it well. But it's a matter of volume. As I mentioned, we received a volume, the unprecedented volume, 22,000 complaints since the month of December, and we work very hard to be able to process them. And probably in 2021, we'll be able to start processing those who were late. I mean, the complaints from March for the beginning of the pandemic. I would like to know what you think about this.
And thank you, Mr. Striner. We're now going to move on to Mr. Backrack of the NDP. Mr. Backrack, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses. During this pandemic, Canadians have been hurt financially in so many ways. And I hear from constituents all the time who've lost their income, who are in financial distress, who are having trouble paying the bills. Now, a relatively modest number of Canadians were in a very specific situation where they bought airplane tickets, some of them very expensive, in the thousands of dollars, from airlines that up until the pandemic were doing very well. These are huge corporations that in 2019 were celebrating billions of dollars in profits, that had access to billions of dollars in liquidity. And we're being told by the government that these Canadian citizens who purchased these airfares are not able to get a refund because the government is concerned that the airline corporations are going to go bankrupt. Now, this is you're putting citizens in a situation where they're essentially involuntary or unwilling creditors to these huge corporations. I'm wondering to either Mr. Strainer or Mr. Hansen, how you could possibly construe this as a fair situation.
Mr. Chair, I'd be happy to take this question. Thank you for the question. I would direct the members' attention to the statement by Minister Garneau on November 8th, which was quite explicit on this point, that although the government is prepared to consider assistance for air carriers, given the significant pressures on their liquidity, it is not prepared to do so unless Canadians whose flights were canceled as a result of the pandemic receive a refund rather than a voucher.
Mr. Backrack?
So, Mr. Hansen, is it fair to say that the government has been forced into supporting a situation that is profoundly unfair for those Canadians
Mr. Hansen?
that are out of pocket for airfare?
I think the government has always recognized the difficult situation of, on the one hand, individuals whose flights were canceled as a result of the pandemic. On the other hand, a situation where air carriers themselves had very constrained liquidity and cash flow because their revenues had collapsed. And so that's why it's come forward with an approach that says it's prepared to provide support to the airlines, but putting conditionality on it in terms of refunds for passengers.
Mr. Backrack?
Mr. Strainer, in your opening remarks, if I understood you correctly, you indicated that the CTA was somewhat caught off guard by this gap in the regulations, that in hindsight, this should have been rectified. Is it fair to say that you weren't aware of a gap in the air passenger protection regulations that could have avoided this situation?
Mr. Strainer?
Thank you. Thank you to the member, Mr. Chair, for his question. What I was actually referring to is that really, I don't think anybody identified the gap. And to be clear, the gap stems from the legislation. The legislation gave the CTA the authority to make the air passenger protection regulations. If you read the relevant section related to cancellations that are outside airlines' control, it constrains our ability to make regulations to only requiring that airlines ensure passengers can complete their itineraries. Frankly, if the section had been more permissive, we might well have established a refund obligation, as we did for cancellations within airlines' control. But we were constrained by the language of the legislation, and I don't think anybody at the time, not parliamentarians, not consumer rights advocates, I don't think anybody recognized that gap in the legislation and the regulations could be as significant as we've now realized it is.
Mr. Bachrach.
Mr. Strainer, the reason I mention this is because the organization Air Passenger Rights wrote to the CTA during the crafting of those regulations and said very specifically, APR is deeply concerned about the omission of a number of important issues from the proposed regulations. This state of affairs creates the incorrect impression that airlines are free to do as they please in these areas. APR strongly believes this was not Parliament's intent. So here they are, they've identified the gap and they're bringing it to your attention. Was there nothing that the CTA could do to address the situation in the regulations?
In terms of establishing a refund obligation, I assume that that's the question. Regarding flight cancellations beyond airline control, the answer is no. The legislation constrained us. There was no way that we could establish that obligation in the regulations, given the wording of the legislation.
Mr. Bachrach.
So picking up where Mr. Barsalou-Duval left off, and I did not get clarity on this in the answers to his question, so I'm going to ask them again.
Certainly.
In the air transportation regulations, it very specifically speaks to the refunds issue, and yet the statement on vouchers says, quote, the law does not require airlines to include refund provisions in their tariffs for flights that are canceled for reasons beyond their control. If you read the regulations, section 122, which Mr. Barsalou-Duval read earlier, it very clearly says, quote, refund or every tariff shall contain, quote, refunds for services purchased but not used, whether in whole or in part, either as a result of the client's unwillingness or inability to continue, or the air carrier's inability to provide the service for any reason. So how could these seem to be in direct conflict with each other? How do you explain this?
Mr. Strainer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the air transportation regulations and the section that you and your colleague referred to outline the areas in which an airline, the areas or the topics which must be addressed by an airline's tariff. They don't establish the minimum obligations. They don't establish what the terms are. They simply indicate that terms must be established in these areas. Therefore, they don't establish a minimum obligation to pay compensation or to pay refunds in situations beyond airlines' control, only that a tariff has to address those questions.
Thank you, Mrs. Strainer, and thank you, Mr. Bachrach. We're now going to go on to our second round, 5 minutes each from Mr. Soroka of the Conservative Party, as well as Mr. Al-Curry from the Liberal Party, and we have 2.5 minutes each from Mr. Barsalou-Duval of the Bloc and Mr. Bachrach of the NDP. Mr. Soroka, for 5 minutes, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not trying to put words in Mr. Hansen's mouth, but it sounds like if the federal government gives support to airlines, that there will be a condition that they have to refund passengers their money if the passenger wants that. And if that's the case, if there's going to be a time frame attached to that as well, meaning how long will you give airlines to refund all passengers that cancel trips so they can comply with the conditions that the federal government has set?
Mr. Hansen.
Thank you very much for the question. Yes, no, I think when we get to the point of the payment of refunds, there would certainly need to be some sort of approach for detailing the manner and timing in which they would be provided.
But you don't have a time frame right now or as to what that'll look like. They're still in the infancy stages?
Mr. Hansen.
Thank you for the question. I don't have a timeline. I think I will say, we'll have to, there'll be a lot of, contacting individual people. A lot of people, as you're probably aware, purchase their tickets through third-party vendors online, companies like Expedia and Travelocity, et cetera. So there would, but we would obviously be pushing chair for this to be done in a very timely fashion because, lengthy delays in getting refunds are not consistent with the idea of providing the Canadians refunds that they're expecting.
Okay.
Mr. Soroka.
Yes, Mr. Chair. So I recently had a Zoom call with several independent travel advisors. That association has over 1,200 members across Canada, and each one of them own and operate a small business. And they're self-employed. Independent travel advisors work on 100% commission and have been hit very hard by COVID. Many in my riding do not qualify for existing CERB programs as well. So does the department have a plan in place to ensure travel advisors aren't collateral damage from airline passengers getting refunded by airline clawing back their commissions? Do you think that'll be part of the condition as well when you're negotiating or not?
Thank you, Chair. That is a great question, and it kind of points out some of the challenges associated with this and the need to get it right, because as you say, there is a spin-off consequence potentially for travel agents who suddenly see a collapse in commissions as a result of a massive wave of air refunds. What I can tell the member is that we are aware of this issue. We are discussing it with our colleagues at ISED, who are kind of work more with the sector than we do. Can't obviously say what solution we will arrive at, but I can assure the member it's very much on the radar.
Mr. Soroka?
Yes, that's very good to hear that you're at least aware of that and trying to work towards some kind of solution. Now, you also spoke about how there's could be different types of conditions on travel. Currently, right now, we have face masks and temperature checking. Do you think that'll become now a standard practice in airports, or is this just an anomaly, or will this continue after COVID crisis is over with?
Mr. Hanson?
Actually, if I may, Mr. Chair, perhaps I could take that
McCrory.
question. Yeah, thank you for the question. We're constantly reassessing the measures that we have put in place from a health point of view, and we're adapting them as we go along based on the latest health guidance that we get. So depending on how the pandemic plays out over the weeks and months to come, and how, for example, the application of a vaccine, testing regimes, we may be able to move away from some of these measures as new measures come in place, or as the pandemic comes under control. But I think bottom line is I think we've got the flexibility to adapt to the changing health conditions and respond to the changing health advice. And a good example is a little bit of how our requirements around face masks have evolved over time. We've adjusted them from the initial kind of requirements in the spring to more recently, based on the latest health guidance, provided more flexibility for parents traveling with younger children in terms of their use of face masks. So we will evolve over time based on the latest information.
Mr. Soroka?
Okay, that's quite interesting. Yes or no, but yeah, I know it's a hard decision to come forward right now. Myself, I get a lot of residents with conspiracy theories, vaccinations and all these kind of stories. Do you think this will be a condition in travel where if they do not take the vaccine, that they will not be allowed to travel? Is that a potential? Please alleviate my fears, because I have to deal with this on a regular basis.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, I missed the beginning part of the question, but I think it was, will vaccination be a standing requirement for travel? And I think it's premature to know for sure. Our colleagues from health may have some views on that as well, but it's certainly, I would say, in the repertoire of tools that we can bring to bear to manage the health risk, and looking at, for example, we've talked about testing, looking at people coming into the country, for example, would there be a requirement for a test prior to departure? Would we be looking for proof of vaccination prior to getting on an aircraft? Those are certainly options that we're looking at, but it's premature to make any declarations at this point in time.
Thank you, Mr. McCrory, and thank you, Mrs. Soroka. We're now going to move on to Mr. El-Khoury for 5 minutes. Mr. El-Khoury, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our guests. Your presence is extremely important, and it's very useful for the committee. We are going through a very complex and dangerous situation right now, and the impact of the pandemic on the air sector is unprecedented. Here in Canada, we depend a lot on our air sector, even more than other countries. My first question is for Mr. Strainer. Mr. Strainer, you explained the regulation that speaks to the obligation to refund or not, to refund clients or not. Could you explain what happens in extreme situations, and can we qualify the pandemic as being an extreme situation? Yes, thank you. Thank you for this question. I can't really answer simply. And this is a question that we could look at as a quasi-judicial organization. It's an interpretation of facts and the law. And in order to keep our impartiality, we have to look at the process for decision making, and before having this is an important question, and I cannot answer it right now. Okay, so how has the pandemic affected independent flight attendants? They are not federal jurisdiction. So what we know is what we read in articles and in media accounts, but these flight attendants are under provincial jurisdiction. Thank you. If you put out an order stipulating that air carriers had to refund, would that even have been legal, given the conditions linked to the tariff? I'm thinking about the clause as to exceptional cases and the distinction between refundable tickets and non-refundable tickets at the moment of sale. Thank you. It's true that this distinction can be important. There are Canadians who purchased refundable tickets and others who purchased non-refundable tickets, and there's exceptional case clause that are relevant to this discussion, and all these issues have to be dealt with within a formal decision-making process, a quasi-judicial process. So these are the types of questions that we will deal with in our discussions and our decision-making processes. During this pandemic, what do you think about what could have happened to the air carriers if they had been obligated to refund all the passengers who requested a refund, and what could have been the consequences for Canadian travelers and communities? Once again, this is a question that could be asked of my colleagues at Transport Canada, but I mean, we don't know exactly. We do know that the situation, that the crisis is unprecedented. But for us, the question is to see what are the legal obligations of air carriers and what are the legal rights of passengers. These are the questions we deal with. So I don't want to speculate with regards to hypothetical cases. Why have you put out a directive saying that vouchers could be an alternative, an acceptable alternative to refunds, to cash refunds for the traveler who saw their flight cancelled because of COVID-19? For a simple reason. It's a way to reduce risk that air passengers have zero compensation. And as I said, there is a gap. There is a gap in the legislative framework, and it created a risk for air travelers. And our message and our objective with regards to these vouchers was to try to reduce the risk.
Move on for 2.5 minutes to Mr. Barcelou-Duval of the Bloc. Mr. Barcelou-Duval.
Thank you. Mr. Strainer, we mentioned earlier that there's a long wait right now, so our complaints will be dealt with. If I was a manager of a complaint department and I had 2 years if I had 2 years of backlog and could you repeat that question? Yes, here's my question. If I was a manager of a complaints department, I had 2 years of backlog of complaints, I had dealt with no complaint over the 9 preceding months, wouldn't I lose my job? Well, the question for me is if all the employees are working hard, if they are mobilized in order to deal with complaints. And the answer, if we're talking about the CTA, yes. Everyone is mobilized. Everyone is trying to deal with complaints. As I said, we dealt with 6,000 complaints. I only have 2.5 minutes. But you did announce that you've dealt with no complaints with regards to cancellation of plane tickets up to September, and this was set back to 2021 even. I'd like to know, a message was sent out with regards to credits in March. This was done by the CTA. Did you participate in writing this message? All the messages, all the guidelines, all the documents are written by our organization, but myself, of course I'm involved, but... Okay, so I'd like to know, did you have communication or was a will expressed by the Minister of Transportation with regards to a position that could be made with regards to refunds? We communicated with the office of the Minister of Transportation during this entire crisis. This is extremely important, but also it's an issue of transparency. It's not to try to ask permission. There was a certain communication in order to make sure that we were not creating any confusion.
Thank you, Mr. Strader. Thank you, Councilor Duval. We're now going to move on to the NDP. Mr. Bachrach, 2.5 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Strainer, which individuals authored and approved the March 25th statement on vouchers?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The statement on vouchers, like all guidance material posted by the agency and by the CTA, and we post a great deal of non-binding guidance material, policy statements, information. All of that material is, there are many people who participate in its preparation, in its drafting, and in its review. So there were a large number of employees who contributed to that.
Who approved it? Who approved it?
Ultimately, every statement like this is an expression of the organization's guidance. As I emphasized earlier, the statement on vouchers, like these other documents, is non-binding in nature, and it's an expression of guidance or of suggestions to the traveling public by the institution.
So an email from a policy advisor at Transport Canada to Member of Parliament Erskine Smith revealed that the CTA's members, vice chair, and chair would have approved the statement on vouchers, which gave airlines the clearance to refuse refunds. Is this correct? That the members, the chair and the vice chair approved it?
Well, Mr. Chair, I'm not sure about that email. I haven't seen the email. It's not in front of me. The office of the Minister of Transport would not have been privy to the internal decision-making processes at the CTA. And I would simply reiterate that every statement, non-binding, that's made by the CTA, every guidance document, is a reflection of institutional guidance and, of course, is reviewed by senior members of the organization.
Mr. Strainer, will you commit to providing this committee with all internal documents, memos, and emails concerning the March 25th statement of vouchers and the subsequent clarification?
The CTA is subject to the same access to information rules as any other organization. We have a policy of transparency. And so we try to come forward. I will commit to certainly providing the committee with those documents that it's appropriate to provide, but we are a quasi-judicial tribunal and independent regulator, and certain material is privileged.
The challenge here, Mr. Strainer, as I'm sure you can guess from this line of questioning, is that as a quasi-judicial body, the CTA is in a position to fairly and without prejudice adjudicate these complaints that have come in from air passengers. And this statement of vouchers, does it not prejudice that process? Because this very clearly sets out the outcome of those complaints related to refunds. It says that you've already said that it's reasonable. So why adjudicate those specific complaints if you've already said that it's a reasonable approach?
Mr. Strainer.
Mr. Chair, thank you. I want to give a very clear response to this question. Nothing in the non-binding statement on vouchers, which was issued in order to protect passengers from ending up with nothing at all as a result of this situation, in part because of the legislative gap that I've spoken about earlier. Nothing in that non-binding statement in any way affected or affect the rights of anybody who brings a complaint before us. The Federal Court of Appeal has already recognized that passengers' rights aren't affected. right in the body of the statement, we said that every complaint would be considered on its merit. Every complaint will be considered on its merit impartially based on the evidence and the law.
Thank you, Mr. Strainer, and thank you,
Thank
Mr.
you, Mr. Chair.
Bachrach. Thank you, and thank you to the witnesses.
Monsieur le Président,
Yes, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, I would like to set forth a motion with regards to what's being discussed. Can I present a motion right now?
parfait, Monsieur le Président.
Great. I would like to table a motion that was already tabled on October 26th that reads that according to 18A, that an order of the committee. The interpreter is sorry, but I do not have a copy of this motion.
Suivant l'adoption de cette présente motion.
Okay, so I'm assuming, Mr. Bachrach, this is the motion that you presented a few meetings ago that you want to put on the table right now, that you distributed?
It's Mr. Barcelou-Duval, Mr. Chair.
I'm sorry, Mr. Barcelou-Duval. Thank you, Mr. Bachrach. Mr. Barcelou-Duval, this is the motion that you presented a few meetings ago that you presented to the committee. You want to put it on the floor now?
Monsieur le Président, non, c'est
No, it's not the one with regards to Air Transat. It has to do with the CTA. The motion that I just read was already presented to the committee, but was not discussed yet.
Mr. Clerk, have a copy of that motion.
Yeah, I'm just going to double check, but I do believe that this one was distributed.
Members, I'm going to ask for a 5-minute recess while we look into this motion. If the clerk can provide me with that information, that would be great. So we're going to go on a 5-minute recess. Thank you. Barcelona-Duval. Mr. Clerk, I am going to be
Yes.
by the committee to actually debate this now, as it is now being placed on the floor. So members of the committee, Mr. Barcelona-Duval wishes to place this on the floor for debate. So all those in favor, I'll take it first of all as a motion to place to debate it. So first off, I'm going to be asking for a vote to be placed on the floor for debate. Mr. Clerk, do you want to go through the roll call? Okay, that's fine. The clerk is telling me that we don't need a vote to get it on the floor. So that's fine. So Mr. Barcelona-Duval, I'll give you the floor and the debate has begun for this motion. Mr. Barcelona-Duval, floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, it's a motion that is tabled because with what we heard today, that's it's probably obvious why I table this motion. That is to say, we need to understand where does this statement come from the voucher about the voucher, and what are the interaction with the government? What kind of directives and what the government did. And I think it has some impact on thousands of families, and thousands of dollars are in question here. And I hope that all the members of the committee will agree that we need to obtain this kind of information.
Barcelona-Duval. I'm now going to move over to Mr. Sadu. Mr. Sadu, you got the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And yes, I do understand the importance, but I also understand the importance of the witnesses being here and the questions that we have ready to ask them. There's a lot of important information that I know my constituents are waiting on the answers to in terms of rapid testing and a lot of other important matters. But I think with respect to our witnesses, we need to hear from them. They took time out. We prepared our questions, and I think that's what we need to do here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sadu. I have Ms. Kusi, Mr. Alcuri, and Ms. Jasic. So I'm going to go to Ms. Kusi right now. Mr. Kusi, the floor is yours.
First of all, I support what Mr. Sadu said, in particular in the light that the witnesses from the first hour were, when I say we're not prepared, I mean did not feel comfortable responding to questions that are directed to the Department of Health and Health Agency, excuse me. So I would ask that we return to the witnesses as well at this time. And as well, I would also ask the clerk if he could possibly redistribute the motion if he has not done so already, as I am just attempting to locate it within my documents and I'm struggling to do that. And I would go on a limb to say I'm not alone. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kusi. I have Mr. Biddle, followed by Mr. Alcuri and Ms. Jasic, as well as Mr. Backrack. Mr. Biddle, floor is yours.
I thank Ms. Kusi, and I agree with her sentiment, and I move that debate now be adjourned.
Thank you, Mr. Biddle. With no questions or no debate on that motion, Mr. Clerk, if you can go through the roll call.
Yeah, Mr. Biddle.
In favor.
Monsieur El-Khoury.
In favor.
Ms. Jaczek.
Yes.
Mr. Rogers.
Yes.
Mr. Sidhu.
Yes.
Mr. Cram.
I vote for the motion.
Ms. Kusi.
I vote for the motion.
Mr. Shipley.
In favor?
Mr. Soroka,
In favor?
Monsieur Barcelou Duval,
Contre, Monsieur le Président.
and Mr. Backrack.
I vote opposed as well.
We have 9 in favor, 2 against.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk, and thank you, members. We're now going to move on to our next session. Mr. Clerk, I believe all witnesses are on board here. While we're waiting, the next round is going to be start off with the Conservatives with Ms. Kusi for 6 minutes, followed by Ms. Jacek for 6 minutes for the Liberal Party, followed by the Bloc with Mr. Barcelou Duval for 6 minutes and Mr. Backrack of the NDP as well for 6 minutes. Once we get the witnesses on board and the sound checks done, we'll be ready to go. Mr. Clerk, I'll leave it to you. We are now going to be entering into the second part of our session. We have from the Department of Health, Ms. Friesen, the Acting Assistant Deputy Minister, Programs and Implementation, and from Public Health Agency of Canada, Ms. Diogo, Vice President, Health Security Infrastructure Branch. I'm going to ask both witnesses to be brief because we only have a half an hour, and apparently I'm being told by the House that we have till 5:30 because we have 6:30 committees. And we don't want to take away the resources for them. So if you can be as brief as possible, and that'll allow for more questions from members, that will be wonderful. So I'm not sure who wants to go first. Did you guys flip a coin in the waiting room? Ms. Friesen, go ahead.
Okay.
The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to begin by thanking the committee for the opportunity to speak to you today. I work at Health Canada in the Testing, Contact Tracing, and Data Management Secretariat. We know that COVID-19 has had devastating impacts right across the country, and the aviation sector is no exception. And I'm sure that the efforts of this committee to examine the consequences of this pandemic will undoubtedly shape the efforts to strengthen that sector that is so vital to the Canadian economy and lives of Canadians. The efforts of the health portfolio are focused on protecting public health and looking at the ways that testing can contribute to to that effort and can help social and economic activity. Testing is one of a number of risk mitigation measures that we've employed. We've secured and distributed over 5.7 million tests to the provinces and territories over the last several weeks. I'm pleased to note in particular that we are getting closer to a national target of administering 200,000 of what are called PCR tests, which is the gold standard in COVID-19 testing. That's 200,000 tests per day. We've also released guidance on rapid testing, developed in consultation with provincial territorial health authorities, rapid tests that have the potential for faster turnaround times, lower costs, and administration on a more frequent basis. We're looking at how best to use testing technologies individually or in combination with other public health measures to stop transmission, protect individuals, and detect the virus early. For example, in October, Health Canada launched the Industry Advisory Roundtable on COVID-19 testing, screening, tracing, and data management. It's co-chaired by Health Canada and by Catherine Luello, Senior Vice President and Chief Information Officer at Air Canada. The roundtable enables the federal government to hear directly from leaders in Canadian industry from across the country in a variety of sectors on public health measures and including activity like testing in the workplace. On borders, we're looking at border pilots that can help us acquire science-based evidence to inform how best to reopen our borders. In partnership with the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, we supported McMaster Health Lab's international border surveillance study that occurred at Pearson Airport earlier this fall. The interim results from the McMaster pilot showed a COVID-19 importation rate from international travelers at approximately 1%, which is fairly high. We look forward to receiving the final report in the coming weeks. Our partners at Public Health Agency of Canada have also worked very closely with the Government of Alberta on a program to examine whether quarantine could be reduced for international travelers without compromising public health and safety. The pilot started on November 2nd, and we're actively monitoring the results in close collaboration with the provincial government. We continue to engage with stakeholders, including air carriers, airport authorities, and with other departments, including Transport Canada, on border measures. An effective response to the pandemic cannot succeed without the strong partnerships that exist at all levels of government, across jurisdictions, and with key stakeholders, who are all equally invested in protecting the health and safety of Canadians. With our partners, we'll be looking at, for example, the recently released International Civil Aviation Organization guidance and see how we can apply it in a Canadian context. We also have to bear in mind that travelers from Canada are having to meet testing entry requirements of other countries that they decide to visit. We will need to balance that demand for screening of those coming into Canada with broader screening needs to protect public health and factor in, for example, the health human resources that may be required to conduct that kind of screening. In closing, testing is one important aspect of protecting public health, alongside contact tracing and other preventative measures. How testing applies in the travel context will need to be studied. At the same time, we need to ensure traveler vigilance, not just to protect travelers, but also any aviation worker they come in contact with. I thank you for the opportunity to make these short remarks, and I would be pleased to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Dreesen. I'll now go over to Ms. Diogo for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon. I would like to thank the committee and colleagues for being here today and for being able to answer your questions this afternoon. My name is Brigitte Diogo. I'm the Vice President of Health Security Infrastructure Branch. I will start by saying that the border measures that we currently have in place to support public health are one that we had found to be effective. We are working with all stakeholders and all other departments like Transport Canada to continue to look at what are the options to ease the border restriction going forward. And the point that my colleagues has made in terms of testing is one that we are paying a lot of attention to. Given the short time that you have, Mr. Chair, I propose to go to the question, if you agree.
Thank you, Ms. Diogo. I appreciate that. So we're going to start off with our first round, 6 minutes each. We have Ms. Cusi from the Conservatives. We have Ms. Jacek from the Liberals. We have Mr. Barcelona-Val from the Bloc, and Mr. Backrack from the NDP. So we're going to start off with Ms. Cusi for 6 minutes. Ms. Cusi, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much to both of our witnesses being here today. I'm going to go back to the YYC pilot as mentioned by Ms. Friesen, as I attempted to ask our witnesses in the first round more information about this, but I'm hopeful that Ms. Friesen will be able to respond to my questions. Ms. Friesen, can you tell me how long it took Transport Canada and the other various government departments to get this pilot project underway?
Thank you, Chair, for the question. The Public Health Agency of Canada, Health Canada, worked quite closely with the provincial government to launch the pilot that started on November 2nd. There was a lot of work involved that went into the launch. We had to discuss and articulate what the measures would be to protect public health from those who would be released from quarantine. We wanted to make sure that all of us wanted to make sure that there would be sufficient testing and contact tracing capacity available for the participants of the pilot. We wanted to make sure that the instructions for participants and for border agents were very clear so that implementation would be smooth. And then there were the regulatory regimes that exist, or the legal regimes that exist both federally and provincially for managing quarantine. So it took a lot of effort for both the federal and the provincial government to launch the pilot. I'm not sure exactly how long it took, but I can come back with an estimate of the amount of time. Now that we have the sample of the pilot with Alberta, though, it will be a bit easier to talk to other jurisdictions about similar kinds of models because we have worked out some of those details, including things like the collection of data and what information we want to get from the pilot to improve the evidence base for making decisions going forward.
So can you confirm then that other airports are being looked at to implement this program as well? And what sort of timeline could we expect to see the implementation of this program at other airport authorities?
Ms. Friesen?
Thank you, Chair. I can confirm that we have talked to provinces and territories about the Alberta pilot and that we have talked to them about a framework for pilots going forward and talked to them about the possibility of having similar arrangements with the provinces, with other jurisdictions.
So based upon your experience,
although, yes, I'm sorry, member. Although not necessarily exactly the same, we'd have to work very collaboratively with each jurisdiction to get a sense of what kind of conditions they would want to pilot.
Okay, so you wouldn't be able to provide a timeline like per airport. It would be independent to each authority, is what you're saying.
Yes, it would, and we would work very closely with provinces and territories to determine a timeline.
Okay, thank you for that. You mentioned the McMaster data, and in reviewing the data and having conversations with them, I see that the results show that after the 7-day quarantine period, it is less than the 0.1 of the 1%, so approximately 1 in 10,000 individuals who would test positive after the 7-day quarantine based upon the data. Is the department using this data to look at reducing quarantine times for international arrivals who have been tested?
Thank you, Chair, for the question. On the MHL study, they tested the participants on arrival at day 7 and then again at day 14. They had positive and negative rates at each of those days. When we see the final report come out in the next several weeks, we'll be able to look at what the final data was for the testing at each of those stages. And yes, absolutely, we're finding that the study that was done in Toronto was quite informative on what the testing rates and importation rates might be from travelers.
Ms. Kusi?
No, thank you, because it did seem very interesting to me that it was the 0.7 of the 1% upon arrival, the 0.3 at the 7-day, and less than the 0.1. And in fact, they even thought the 0.1 might be attributed to those perhaps who didn't guard quarantine. So I do hope that the department will consider that as we move forward in an effort to relieve the airline sector. I'm now going to move to another question where the government has deemed airline pilots as essential workers, but because there is a limitation imposed by the definition of aircrew found in OIC 2020-0175, minimizing the risk of exposure to COVID-19 in Canada, order prohibition of entry into Canada from the United States, pilots traveling to and from the U.S. as a requirement of their employment, deadheading or training, or having to quarantine for 14 days upon their return to Canada. Is your department aware of this issue, and is your department working to fix this issue?
Ms. Reason?
For this question, Chair, if I could turn to my colleague, Vice President Diogo, to address that question because it is about compliance and enforcement.
Absolutely. Ms. Diogo?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. We are aware of this question, this issue, and we are indeed looking at it, working with Transport Canada in terms of the options to address it going forward.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Diogo.
Thank you, Ms.
Ms.
Diogo.
Reason. Thank you, Ms. Kusi.
Thank you, Chair.
We're now going to move on to Ms. Jacek for 6 minutes. Ms. Jacek, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much to our witnesses for your presentations and your testimony with Ms. Kusi, because, of course, I think we're all very aware how important the pilots are going to be in terms of the rapid testing on arrival. Just to emphasize, of course, that second test after the person has arrived is extremely important in relation to the potential for transmission during the flight itself. Because we're well aware that infectious diseases have been transmitted during long flights in the past, tuberculosis being a case in point, and even during SARS, there was transmission on the airplane itself. So I was wondering, as a first question, perhaps it's more appropriate for Ms. Diogo, is what do we know in terms of transmission in the early days of the COVID-19 epidemic? In terms of cases that were contracted potentially on the plane itself? Is there any information coming back from contact tracing of positive cases that you could give us some information on?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the question. We do have some data in terms of COVID cases of found from travelers who made their journey through air travel. And currently, there is a requirement to report those cases. So we get the information from public health officials, and that information is published on our website. I will be happy to provide some statistics to the committee related to transmission. Overall, the first cases of the border measures have been in place since March, and the first cases of COVID were really related to people who were affected by air travel. And we found that following the imposition of the border measures, that the rate of transmission due to travel-related transmission have decreased significantly. So certainly there is some data that we can provide to the committee for your study.
I think it would be very useful, and it might be good to see it, as you say, once those border measures were put in place, that hopefully there was less transmission during the flight itself. I think that's important for the traveling public to know, who are clearly very leery of flying at this point in time. So in relation, the Department of Transport did relay to us some of the measures that have been taken in order to hopefully provide safety during the flight. Could you, as the Public Health Agency of Canada, just confirm for us that you're confident that these measures are working and are important? I will disclose that during the Health Committee this summer, we did hear from the airlines, and it was at the time when, in particular, WestJet had in fact eliminated the middle seat in terms of planes, and they were going to go back and reinstate the possibility of having 3 people abreast, which of course does not allow for physical distancing. So could you reassure us or assure us on behalf of your agency that you are confident that the measures that are being taken are contributing significantly to the safety of passengers?
Diogo?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I would say the quick answer to that question is yes. In our view, the risk remain low, given some of the measures that have been put in place, including the screening of passengers before boarding, some of the measures that have been taken in terms of wearing masks, the temperature check, and the overall series of measures. I believe that the studies have shown that the ventilations on airplanes are all contributing to reducing the risk. So Dr. Tam recently has mentioned during her updates indicating that in the view of the Public Health Agency that the risk on airplane is low.
And perhaps if I could quickly turn to the issue of safety in airports themselves, and perhaps Ms. Frison, Health Canada has had a look. Obviously, we know that there are far few people flying. However, airports are usually pretty crowded places. Have there been any particular provisions from the perspective of Health Canada in terms of advice to airports in terms of reducing the possibility of the spread of COVID-19?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not aware of any particular advice for airports in particular. My understanding is that airports follow the public health measures that are in place from the provincial territorial governments as well as those recommendations from the federal government that would be related to hygiene, social distancing, masks, and the layers of support for protecting against transmission.
Jessica?
Ms. Diogo, could you enlighten us at all in terms of the situation around airports? Who exactly has the responsibility in terms of ensuring public health protection within airports?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. The Public Health Agency have indeed issued guidance to the Canadian aviation sector, and we have been working with airports, looking at the increased measures in terms of social distancing, the non-surgical mask requirements. Those guidances are available on our website. Working closely with Air Canada, we continue to pay attention to what's happening at airports. The volumes are very low currently, and so if volume were to increase to level higher than they are now, certainly some of those measures will become more challenging in terms of maintaining social distancing at all time. But the fact that the wearing of a mask is a requirement is contributing to reducing the risk. From a Public Health Agency of Canada, we have also increased our presence at airports and at the land border to support the screening of passengers, working closely with the airport authorities.
Thank you, Ms. Diego. Thank you, Ms. Jasic. We're now going to move on to Mr. Barcelou-Duval of the block for 6 minutes. Mr. Barcelou-Duval, the floor is yours.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Several months ago, I would say May 2020, we learned that a test was certified by Health Canada, and it was by Spartan Bioscience and Science, and it cost millions of dollars, and it was not a good test. And Transport Canada had to recall them. I wonder, why did you have to recall tests, or why did you certify tests that were actually recalled by later on?
Mr. Chair, I was waiting for my colleague to take the question, but I'm not aware of this issue, and we can certainly follow up if Monique doesn't have an answer to this question.
Merci, j'aimerais beaucoup avoir cette réponse parce qu'on prend.
Well, I would like to have this answer because we are talking about a rapid test. We are talking about, and also to use them in the aviation sector. And I think it's very important to have real tests or efficient tests. And if Health Canada has certified products that are not efficient, then it makes perhaps a little bit more difficult to implement these tests, which would be a very good thing for the industry. My next question is, when do you think that we could implement a reliable test in this industry? When do you think it would be feasible?
Merci, Monsieur le Président, pour la question.
Thank you for your question. At this point, we don't have a special date or to reduce the quarantine. We are looking at the results of the tests that in the pilot projects as the projects in Alberta, and to see what are the data, the resulting data, to see how we could reduce the propagation. So it's an option on the table, but at this point we are at the step where we just are putting together the findings to make a decision. Yes, it's very significant to respect jurisdiction, especially in Quebec, for health matters. But I'm trying to understand, because the pilot project has been around for several months, so you don't have the results yet? The pilot project is happening since November, the beginning of November. And yes, we don't have all the results linked to this project. There are several considerations. For instance, the type of data we need, and not only the type of test, but also the length of the test. Sometimes the length of the disease, for instance, the virus does not appear in the very beginning of the sickness. I mean, people are symptomatic after a while. Yeah, I understand, and it's very important. And it makes it difficult to have good tests. But we need to have we need tests without false negatives. I would like for you to go back to the beginning of the pandemic. In March, for instance, the Public Health Agency did not announce that it was significant to close the borders, and there was a very quick increase of cases in Canada. Did the public agency had asked the government to close the borders beforehand, before the government decided to do it? Thank you for the question. Well, the Public Health Agency reacted quite fast. Already in December, when we heard about the situation, Of course, with hindsight, we can wonder why certain things were not done or implemented. But the measures we implemented when they were implemented allowed us to cope with the risk, and they need to be renewed. You cannot say whether if they had been put in place earlier, maybe we wouldn't have had so many cases in Quebec, for instance. Well, this is also a decision by the government, and if you go back in time, you say that there were people from the government for this city of Montreal to distribute information because there was nothing done at the federal level. What do you think about this laxism? Well, Mr. Speaker, I would like to have more data on the situation, more details about the situation. But what I can say that an important part of all this is communication to Canadians. And at the very beginning, we created pamphlets that we distributed in the airports. The measures taken by the federal government are not the only measured. Provinces and territories also took other measures in their own contexts. And I think that the more we do, the better it is. Thank you. Merci.
Councilor Duval. We're now going to move on to Mr. Bachrach of the NDP for 6 minutes. Mr. Bachrach, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being with us today. It might not be quite as exciting as Fortnite that Ms. Friesen's son is partaking in, but we'll try to make it as interesting as possible. I wanted to go back to something that Ms. Jacek started discussing, and this is the sale of the middle seat and physical distancing on airplanes. And I was remembering back to June, we had Minister Garneau before our committee, and we spoke specifically about physical distancing. And in his remarks, he said, if I recall correctly, he said that physical distancing is the most important thing. Like, he really highlighted its importance in terms of keeping people safe from the transmission on aircraft. And then sometime after that, we had the international airline industry advocating for that restriction to be loosened, and eventually Transport Canada went along with that, and they started selling the middle seats. I'm wondering if that was done in consultation with PHAC, whether it was at the advice of the agency, and whether that was a move that increased or decreased people's safety on these airplanes. Just given the minister's earlier remarks, it seems like this was noted when it occurred and they started selling the middle seat. Could you speak to that process? Was this something that your agency agreed was safe to do?
Ms. Diogo.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. We work very closely with Transport Canada and with other agency. It's the conversation is constant. I won't go as far as saying that the Public Health Agency approved the change in terms of selling middle seat. Those decisions are company decisions. I'm not aware of how Transport Canada play in that, but certainly the conversations related to what are the risks. As you know, one of the part of the advice of the public health agency is that when social distancing is not possible, that the wearing of the non-surgical mask is a recommended approach. I would also say that in the conversations, exchanges that we had with Transport Canada was the exchange of information in terms of what was being, what evidence and information was coming through the international community in terms of the airplanes and how they were built, etc. But Public Health Agency does not provide a sanction, does not sanction those type of decisions. Thank you.
Mr. Backrack?
So is it fair to say, based on that answer, that PHAC was not consulted by Transport Canada or the airlines prior to the relaxation of the social distancing measures?
Mr. Yogo?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am confident in saying that the Public Health Agency would have been consulted, being part of discussions, but not being in a position to approve final decisions on what was being done. But certainly, we talk to Transport Canada. Transport Canada contact us regularly on this type of issues.
Mr. Backrack?
Okay, thank you. If I understand from the previous answers, the reasoning for airlines being exempt from those social distancing measures is really around the ventilation systems on the aircraft. Is that correct?
Mr. Yogo?
Airlines are not exempt from social distancing. What I would say is that there are a number of reasons why the air transportation is still a major requirement for Canadians, and it's important to maintain some travel. And on an airplane, it's very difficult to do social distancing. But certainly, we all the view that the current practices that we have seen, that the risk over when you take into account the series of measures within the airport, getting on the plane, getting off, that all those measures put together make the risk low in our view.
Mr. Backrack?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Moving on to the topic of rapid tests, which I know is of great interest to a lot of members. Do these rapid tests have the same rate of accuracy as the standard PCR test that's being used in Canada?
Mr. Yogo?
Thank you. Monique Frisson would take that question.
Thank you. Ms. Frisson?
Thank you, Chair. It depends on the test, both the rapid test and the PCR test. So a PCR lab-based test can have a very high performance rate, sensitivity and specificity. So can antigen tests. And Health Canada has issued guidance that it wouldn't consider or approve rapid tests unless they have at least an 80% sensitivity rate, for example. They're usually for the rapid tests, they don't necessarily perform on average as well as lab-based gold standard tests, but the other performance characteristics of them, including the ease of use, can sometimes compensate. Like I said in my opening remarks, it depends on the situation that you want to test or screen, and it depends on what you're using that result for.
Thank you, Ms. Friesen. Thank you, Mr. Backrack. Ms. Diogo, thank you as well. Members of committee, it's 5:35 actually, and we have to adjourn this meeting due to the fact that we have others that will be meeting and need resources for their committees. So with that, I want to thank you. I want to congratulate you as well. It was a great meeting. Well done. A lot of good questions to all the witnesses, and to the witnesses, thank you for your participation as well. And with that, I will adjourn today's meeting.